most amazing artist. I hope you are having a wonderful day today. I'm super excited about today because we're, one, starting a new project. I'm always super excited to start a new project with you guys. And two, we get to play with clay. Well, we get to create with clay. And this is just regular clay made from materials from the earth. And with this clay, we are going to be making a sculpture. We're going to make a beehive pinch pot. A sculpture is a 3D work of art that you can see from all sides. You can see it from the left side, the back, the right side, and the front. We usually make 2D art and you can only see it from one side. You can see it from the front, but with the sculpture it's 3D, so you can see all around it. Now to make our beehive pinch pot, I have a couple of things. Of course, I have my clay. I have a bowl over here that has two different things. This part of my bowl has something called slip. And slip is basically just clay mixed with water, and that is going to act like our glue when we want to attach other things. We're going to attach a bee to our beehive, so we're going to need some slip because that's like our glue. I have some water in case my clay starts to dry out, because clay does like to dry out. You'll notice if your clay is like cracking in certain places, then it's probably very, very thirsty, and you're going to have to add some water to it, and I'll show you how to do that later on. I have a toothbrush because this is what we're going to be slipping and scoring. If you remember, slip is like our glue to attach pieces of clay together. And we also have to score it, which means we have to draw lines into it so that that slip has something to seep into and really stick two pieces of clay together. So we're going to be scratching our clay with this toothbrush, and then we can add some slip on top to help bind any two pieces of clay that we want together. I also have a little drawing tool to add any other details that I'd like to. This is just a wooden skewer with a pointy end, so I can add some details. I also have a clay mat underneath my work, and this is kind of like our messy mat when we work with clay. However, we can't use a real like paper messy mat because then the clay will get stuck to it, and clay doesn't get stuck to canvas, which is what this mat is made out of. It also helps keep our table from getting messy. We never want to put this clay on our table because it will stick. Okay, so make sure your clay is always on your mat. That's everything you're going to need today to make this adorable beehive pinch pot. Let's go ahead and get started. Right off the bat, I notice that my clay is pretty dry, so I'm just dipped a couple of my fingers into the water, not to the slip. I'm just adding some water to this right now, and I'm gonna squish it in. If your clay starts getting dry or cracky looking, then you're gonna wanna add some water like I'm doing right now. If your clay is not cracking, then it's probably fine, it does not need water. However, clay is very hard to work with if it's super dry. So that's why we just add a little bit of water at a time. And you don't want to add too much water because it could get to the point where you're starting to make slip, and we don't want that. That is when your clay is all mushy and gushy and it's impossible to make anything out of. So that's why I'm only adding just a little bit of water at a time. Do not add too much because we don't want our clay ball to turn into slip. We want it to still be clay. It should be a little bit squishy, but not cracky. And there are two parts to this pinch pot. One is the main pinch pot, and then we have a little piece of clay that is going to be our bee. So I'm just going to pinch off a little piece of clay. This is going to be my bee, and I'm going to save that for later. Now I have the rest of my clay, which is the bigger section. We're going to make a really big section and then for our pinch pot, and then we'll have a tiny section for our bee. My clay is starting to get dry again, so I'm just going to add some water to it and squish it in. Do we add a lot of water to our clay ball? No, we don't need a lot of water, just a little bit at a time. Once you add a little bit, squish it around in your hands. And this part, this bigger section, is going to be our pinch pot. And to make a pinch pot, we first have to start with a sphere. A sphere is a 3D circle. It is not a flat two-dimensional circle, it's 3D. That means you can see it from all sides. So what I'm doing is I put my clay in the palm of my hand and I'm starting to roll it together using my muscles to roll that into a ball. If you have some flat areas, you can kind of squish it together to make somewhat of a sphere. It doesn't have to be perfect. And what I'm going to do is I am going to take my finger and I'm going to press a hole in it. And I didn't push my finger all the way through because we don't want to put a hole in the bottom of our pinch pot, just a little bit. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to start using my pointer finger and my thumb, and I'm going to start pinching the sides. Pinch one time, then rotate, pinch, rotate, pinch, rotate. And as you can see, the hole for my pinch pot is getting a lot bigger. Now we don't want to pinch it so hard that our clay becomes very, very thin, because if it's too thin, then it will probably break once it's fired in the kiln. So what I'm going to do is, if I see any skinny or thin areas, I'm going to skip that and go to the wider areas. And we want to squish those down. And I'm just doing this all the way around my pinch pot. And I'm going to take one part of my stick and I'm just going to go a little bit deeper. We don't want to poke a hole through the bottom. However, if you accidentally poke a hole, that's okay. Mistakes happen. We know that we are just humans and mistakes are a part of the process. So if you make a mistake, that's totally fine. And actually with clay, it's pretty cool if a mistake happens, because what you can do is you can just squish it back into a ball and try again. So what I'm trying to do is I am trying to make a beehive shape almost. And I want it to be a little bit thinner at the top, a little bit wider at the bottom, because what we're going to do is we're going to flip this over and our beehive is going to be like this. So if you want, you can flip your pinch pot over once you feel like it's nice and even around the edges. I do notice some cracking here and there, so I'm just going to take a little bit of water and rub it to smooth out any of those dry areas. And then I can flip it over and I'm going to start carefully pinching up so that it comes up more into kind of like a cone shape. And we can leave it flat on the top because that's where our bee is going to be resting. And I want to cut an opening or a front door into this beehive. So I'm pretty happy with the shape. We're kind of going for like a volcano or mountain shape. And like I said, if you don't get it your first try, is it the end of the world? No, we're just going to keep on going, squish it in a ball, and try again. So what I'm going to do to cut my door, my opening right here, is I'll draw it first with my drawing tool. And I'm just going to draw half of an oval. Okay, we don't want this to be too tiny because then it's going to be hard to cut out. We don't want it to be too big because then our beehive might be a little weak. So what I'm going to do is, after I've drawn it, I'm going to go over that a couple of times in the same place. If you get little scraps of clay on your drawing tool, you can just put it with your other little ball of clay over there. And I'm going to trace over this line a couple times, being very careful not to mess up the rest of my beehive. And it's starting to come out. As you draw this, it's going to start cutting out that shape, and then it will fall off. You can add that to the rest of your clay over here. And look at this, it looks very messy, and actually if I was to just fire this in the kiln like this, then all these little edges will be very, very sharp. So I'm going to take some water and I'm going to smooth out those edges by just dipping one of my fingers in the water and smoothing out that little opening. So then when my beehive gets fired in the kiln, it will not accidentally cut me. Alright, so there is the shape of my beehive with the door cut out. And I'm just going to look at it, make sure I'm happy with it, and I am. And the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to draw some lines. Because if you think of a real beehive, it's got lines going around it. So we're just going to draw some circular lines going around our beehive. Any extra little pieces of clay, I like to call those clay boogers. Get those clay boogers out of the way because we don't need them anymore. So I've drawn one line, and I think we need to have at least 3 lines going all the way around our beehive. And these are just little details right now. After we fire this in the kiln, and then we get to paint it and add our colors, we can really, really make this look amazing. Alright, so I just drew 1, 2, 3 lines around my beehive to make it look more beehivey. Now my beehive is done. So after you do your pinch pot, you make it kind of like a volcano shape, and you cut out your doorway, and you can add some lines around your beehive is done. Now we're ready to start working on our bee. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to make one tiny section and then one bigger section. The tiny section is going to be my bee's head and his wings, and the larger section is going to be his body. Now I've noticed this is pretty dry, okay? And I forgot to mention, if your clay is dry, please don't dip it in the water. We just dip our fingers in the water and add it a little bit at a time. If you dip this whole thing in water, then it's gonna be way too wet, and we do not want that, okay? So only put your fingers in the water and add a little bit of water at a time. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna make another sphere. Remember, our pinch pot started with a sphere that's a 3D circle. I'm gonna put it in my hand and I'm gonna roll it into a sphere. And if you think about a bee's body, it's kind of more oval instead of circular. So I'm gonna take my fingers and I'm gonna start shaping it into more of an oval shape. And you can do this on your mat if it's easier for you. And there is my bee's body. Kind of looks like a little loaf of bread or something. Okay, so there's his body. I'm gonna go ahead and attach his body to the top of my beehive. So what I'm gonna do is we need to slip and score. We're gonna score it with our paint, or our toothbrush, not our paintbrush. And that means just scratch some lines into the top. And then I'll take a little bit of slip on my finger, so I'm just dipping one finger into the slip. That's like our glue, rubbing it on. Now I need to score the bottom of my bee's body. Just run a couple lines underneath his body, add a little bit of slip, and then stick it to the top of your beehive. You can form it a little bit more after it's stuck on. But remember, that slip is like glue. This is gluing our bee to our beehive. Now I'm gonna take the little section, I'm gonna break it in half. We need 1/2 for the wings and 1/2 for his head. So I'm gonna do another sphere for his head, and this is getting pretty tiny. So we need to be very careful with our pieces. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna slip where his head is gonna go. I'm gonna score it with my toothbrush. When I say score, I'm drawing those little lines. And I'm gonna score his head just a little bit. And you can get some little teeny tiny bit of slip. We don't need a lot because this is a tiny little piece. And we're gonna put it on his body. Just like that. And I like to squiggle it around a little bit to make sure that it's nice and secure. And I'm just gonna smooth it out a little bit until I'm happy with it. Now we can go ahead and add a couple details. We can add this stripe on his back. If we think of a bee, they have a black stripe on his back. So I'm just gonna draw 2 lines. And after this is fired in the kiln, we can actually paint that line black and the rest of his body yellow, so he'll look like a real bee. And I'm gonna go ahead and give him a little happy face. I'm gonna do 2 dots for his eyes and a little curve for his smile. Just like that. And now we can make his wings. For his wings, I'm gonna take this little bit of clay that I have left. I'm gonna split it in half, so because bees have 2 wings, so we have 1 wing, 2 wing. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take this little teeny bit of clay and I'm gonna put it on my clay mat and I'm gonna squish it down with my finger. This is creating something called a slab, or a flat piece of clay. Then I'll take my drawing tool and I'm gonna draw half of an oval. And that is going to be his wing. So his wing is very, very tiny. So we have to attach this to his body, and you can flatten it out a little bit more if you want to. But during these little tiny details, you have to be super careful. So I'm just gonna scratch or score a little bit where I want to add this wing, add a little bit of slip, and then put his wing on. If we didn't score these pieces with our toothbrush and add slip, then they would definitely fall off after we have fired it. So that's why slipping and scoring is very, very important. So he has 1 wing on. Now I need to do my last wing. And now I can squish it down to make a slab or a flat piece of clay. And I can kind of almost trace my finger to make the wing. I need to score the other side of his body, score a little bit on my wing, add a tiny amount of slip, and then press it on to my bee. And there are his wings. Now I want to add 2 lines on his wings, because if I think of a bee wing, they have kind of little lines on them, but I have to be very careful while I do that because I don't want to accidentally poke a hole. These wings are very delicate, so we have to take very good care of him. Alright, and there is my little beehive with the bee on top. It looks adorable. I hope you guys had a lot of fun creating this beehive pinch pot today. I hope you learned a lot about clay and how to use it, different clay forms like spheres and slabs, and how to make a pinch pot. I can't wait to see how your final beehives turn out. I know they're going to be amazing because you guys are amazing. All right, I'll see you guys next time. Bye, guys.